climate change negotiations is related to getting all the countries to do it. Even
Yeah.
if Trump says that there are about 11 states out of 50 in the USA
Mhm.
who have pledged that we will follow the Paris Climate Agreement.
Yeah.
So Australia may be doing it. Even Japan does a good solar energy things. But where we are failing is not getting developing countries and developed countries together to get the
Mhm.
job done.
Hello and welcome to Threads, a show where we interview South Asia's most prominent thinkers, and I'm your host Rudradev. My guest today is Mr. Rajendra Shinde, who has been on the frontiers of the global battle against climate change. He has served as the director of the United Nations Environment Programme and was instrumental in crafting and negotiating the Montreal Protocol, which was a global effort to protect the Earth's ozone layer from harmful CFCs. He currently serves as the chairman of TERI, an evidence-based think tank in India. This is a very interesting conversation which tackles everything from morning routines to an analysis of the Indian education system and the role that IITs and IIMs play in our country, to climate change and what the future looks like. This was a blast to shoot, and I learned a lot from talking to Mr. Shinde, and I hope you find this as resourceful as I did. Now, without much further ado, here's the next episode.
You know, getting up early in the morning is what you learn in village. And getting up late is what is inflicted in the cities. Reason is I'm talking about decades back, and there the farmers were very active. So on the roads, when the cattles go, the bullock carts go. Well, there were not many vehicles except for the trucks. So first thing is you learn to get up early in the morning, which I feel is the something which I have cherished, and I feel that that is one of the aspects which remains with you for a long time. That's number one. Number two is uh, growing up in a village is an amazing experience, and I'm sure many of the future generations will miss it totally, because today we are already talking about 40
Mhm.
to 50% people living in urban area,
Yeah.
and by 2050 there will be about 60-70%. So it's all urbanite India.
Mhm.
So that village life is missing. See, village life is something which was nearer to the our origin.
Mhm.
And origin, imagine the humanity started
Mhm.
when they 10-15,000 years back,
Mhm.
they left and gave up their nomadic
Right.
background
Mhm.
and tried to settle to do some agriculture.
Mhm.
And then its progress there was defined by the agricultural progress
Right.
and nothing much more. Then
Mhm.
slowly the industrialization came in, but those industries were related to the villages.
Mhm.
So you slowly started seeing those effect on that. But the small town, all this industrialization has not touched those folks, and there among
Interesting.
them you grow.
Mhm.
So you bring the water from the stream. There is
Mhm.
no tap water. You have the lanterns to study. There is no electricity, because when I went to IIT, I heard that my village has got electricity now. So
Wow.
that was a transformation in the village.
Uh-huh.
Uh, then you don't have much of an shopping options,
Interesting.
and you never use the plastic at that time. You use the
Mhm.
paper and clothes bags and all those things. So
Mhm.
it was totally different. It will be difficult for you to imagine what that life was.
Mhm.
But let me come to the uh, brass tacks. I have a strong opinion that those who had an opportunity to grow in a village,
Mhm.
they start understanding that importance of nature around you. And the nature means not the only the trees, but the flora and
Right.
fauna. It
Mhm.
includes the cattle, and it includes trees, and it includes the crops and everything. And
Mhm.
it also includes the human beings who are getting to develop the agriculture.
Right.
That nearness to the nature changes your mind. And that I realized when I went to United Nations Environment Program. And UNEP, as you know,
Mhm.
is authoritative voice on
Yeah.
environment.
Yep.
And it is sort of a mentor for the world to set up the policies to protect the environment,
Mhm.
policies to make it sustainable. So
Mhm.
coming back to that, I didn't see. I started realizing it, and I should be frank and honest on that.
Uh-huh.
I didn't realize this till I went to United Nations Environment Program.
Interesting.
That how my mind starts thinking in a different way
So
because
it
my
wasn't
nearness
like
to
you.
nature.
So was it that you, because of growing up in the village and being around nature, you decided that okay, that's the line of work I wanted to go into, or was that
Not
happenstance and then you retrospectively?
not at all.
Wow.
When I
Okay.
was in village and growing up in that kind of a surrounding, I never thought of, probably I didn't know much of United Nations except we learned in the textbooks.
Mhm.
And then we said, okay, it's one of the global organization which helps in keeping the peace.
Mhm.
But it does much more than that I realized later on when I
Mhm.
neither I realized it even working in
Mhm.
IIT,
Mhm.
and also not after my first few jobs. I never imagined that that is going to be my line and I will land up in United Nations. That was never my dream.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what was Mr. Shende thinking when he was, 14 years old, uh, in his village? What was your calling at that point? What did you think your 20s and 30s were going to look like? Or let me
I,
rephrase that. What did your parents think your 20s and 30s were going to look like?
say it again.
Like what was the expectations your parents had, or what was the direction you wanted to take your life in when you were
I,
14 or 15, living
yeah.
in?
Uh, See, my parents both were in a sort of a teachers.
Oh,
My mother was a primary teacher, and
oh wow,
she retired as a sort of an head of the school. And my father was a music teacher.
interesting.
So he used to teach classical music,
Mhm.
instruments as well as vocal to the village people. And
Wow.
as we go along, I will tell you what effect it had on me and how that tradition I'm continuing. But my parents never told me that you should become engineer or you should become a doctor or you should become bank manager because they didn't know anything about it. You know,
Wow.
they were in a village all their life.
Mhm.
Of course, they came to Paris in when I went to United Nations Environment Program. But you're talking about when I was 14,
Yeah.
15.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
didn't have anything. And I thought probably I will end up with
Mhm.
being a teacher in a village.
Oh wow.
There were some
Okay.
doctors in a village. I used to go
Uh-huh.
to the doctors,
Uh-huh.
and doctors used to say that your headache is mainly due to too much of a reading you are having. And whenever I have a headache, I used to go to the doctor.
Oh
My
wow.
parents
Okay.
used to take to the doctor. And that time he says, that is because you are reading too much. And I used to feel nice about it. I said, the doctor at least realizes that I'm reading a lot. But that is the first time I felt that, well, I should become a scientist because I'm reading a lot.
Interesting.
Of course, I read a lot about the scientists and, Ramanujam and Einstein and
Oh, interesting.
our Raman, Dr. Raman, who won the Nobel Prize in physics.
Mhm.
So there was no decision of that. So there is no career planning. I know today the career planning is done.
Mhm.
If somebody wants to go for a competitive
Yeah.
examination,
Yeah.
even if you are the 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 son who is in a stomach or daughter who is in a stomach,
Yeah.
you start planning for it. I heard about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coaching classes and this thing and that thing.
Uh-huh.
Well, at the age of 14, nothing of that. And
Interesting.
then, yeah. So I want to tell you a small story, which
Sure.
I realized only when I went to United Nations Environment Program, how important that story is. And
Sure.
there are many stories like that. That time you don't realize it. But then
Yeah.
you say that, look, this is the way we can solve today's problems of environmental degradations and so-called sustainable development. See, just opposite to my ancestral property where I was living with my grandmother, and my parents used to move around in the Satara district because they were teachers of Jilla Parishad, district authority.
Yeah.
So they used to get transferred, and I used to stay myself with my grandmother
Oh, wow.
in
Okay.
Rehmatpur. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there was a couple who was staying just opposite to our house, and their job was to make money by making a layer of tin on a brass vessels, and that is done in a very
Interesting.
crude way. I don't know whether you have seen it. I think many people would probably miss it because now you have stainless steel everywhere.
Uh-huh.
So
I
that
haven't
time,
actually.
yeah, the brass vessels, they're heated. They're heated on a furnace, and
Okay.
furnace is a small thing. You keep on blowing the air on it by mechanically, and then that blows the dried dung pieces, and it gets a heat, and you heat the brass vessel. And once the brass vessel is heated, then there is a small stick of tin. The element which is in a periodic table is called SN. So that tin, you just put it on that vessel, and it melts. And then he gives a nice layer to it. So
Wow.
normally milk and curd, which gets spoiled when you heat it in a brass, it doesn't get spoiled. Okay, that was the idea. Now,
Okay.
his wife used to collect the dung from the roads. I told you in the morning there are a lot of cattle which go from the town to the village to the fields. So the roads were full of bunch of dungs. So she will collect it and she will dry it on the wall. And that one is used for a furnace. Once it is dried, they never use the coal. They use the dried dung. And he made a money out of it. They used to survive. They had one daughter that also, that is their survival thing. And when I went to United Nations Environment Program, I faced many questions. Tell me, Mr. Shende, what is sustainability? And I used to tell this story, that this is exactly the sustainability. And they used to ask me, no, but when you burn the dung, you get a carbon dioxide emission. So that is not a sustainability. They will cross me like that. And I said, look, what that lady used to do while collecting dung, she also used to plant the trees and nice bushes around her house, a small house. And that gave the carbon sink. So, so you don't have to have a renewable energy for that and all those things.
Interesting.
So, and there are many such stories in villages. And
So
somehow I feel that today's government should make a policy that every young boy, 1 year in villages. I think those villages are going to get vanished anyway. So this is the time to do it. So
that's
that is
very
my,
interesting.
yeah.
So I wanted to so you brought up this 1 year in a village, and I think one organization that forces really smart young people to do that is Hindustan Unilever. And I think that program is in the first year. When you join Hindustan Unilever, you have to go to a village and you have to live there, and you have to kind of help the people in that village adopt technologies which make them more efficient, or help them help cows produce more milk or whatnot. So this kind of brings me to my segue. right? You're growing up in a village. You're reading a lot. You're spending a lot of time with your grandmother. Your parents are teachers. Where does IIT come into this? How does a boy who's from a fairly small village with limited resources end up at IIT Bombay? That too, like, way back when.
Yeah.
What was that preparation like? How did that come into your? How did that come into the picture in the first place? Why not law or medicine or something else?
See, there are some times where the things converge in order to push your career. This is what happened. In that village called Rahmatpur, there was one boy who had got admission in IIT. Before that, I didn't know anything about IIT.
Wow.
So he used to come during the vacation to Rahmatpur. And I used to talk to him. And that boy, he looked so serious. And he looked so sort of looking into the future. What he was very, very clear what he wants to do.
Oh, wow.
And I got inspired by that boy. And in the same vacation, my uncle came, my brother's elder brother, my father's elder brother, and he saw my performance in that village. I was always topping in the village school, and he said that you should not be staying in village. You should we should take you to Bombay, and in Mumbai, that is the place where you will be able to compete with more bright students in terms of competition. And he took me to Mumbai, and that was my last year of secondary school.
Was that the first time you were traveling to a big city, or was that?
That was the first time.
Wow. What was that?
That was the first time. That was like, you come from lantern, the kerosene lantern, to the electricity. I'd never seen fridge in my life. Okay.
Wow.
So I got to see the fridge for the first time there. I never saw the fans. So there were fans on in the ceiling. It was an apartment in Mumbai. And my uncle is quite an exemplary person. I mean, he was a Gandhian, and he was working in the khadi and village industry. He was a director there. So he was a pretty simple person, and had a good vision, saying that he has to work for the country. And otherwise he was a Bachelor of Arts, BA, and he would have grown much bigger and probably gone abroad also, because he had that kind of a capability. But he said that I'm going to work based on a Mahatma Gandhi's advice on a village industry. Mahatma Gandhi wanted to see that the industry should start from the villages. That was his dream. We know what happened later on. That is another subject. But that was he was doing it. And I used to get inspired by all his work. And when he said that I should go to Mumbai, I just got ready on my toes, because then I would get to live with him, and I would go to Mumbai and do that. It was a very, very scary experience for me.
Really?
To go to the school in Mumbai. I tell you, I was shaking. Because, and it was a co-education. In village, you have girls separate, boys separate. Okay. And here there was in one. And many of them were so well dressed, looking so good, with all makeup and all.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I was thinking, and I want to tell you the story. See, in first week, I was like sitting, hardly anybody came to watch me, and they used to say that, oh, this guy has come from village. We don't know how we will cope up here. Maybe one or two friends were quite sympathetic to me. They used to come and saying that, okay, let's eat the tiffin together, that kind of thing. But one day that whole thing changed. And I want to tell you that day. Okay?
Okay. I'm ready.
So the Marathi teacher, the one who was teaching Marathi, he came and he noticed me sitting, very, with shame and coy boy and that kind of a thing. And he asked me, what is your name? And I told my name.
Mhm.
He says, where you come from? I said, I was not sure. In Mumbai, you say that you are coming from Rahimatpur. I
Yeah.
thought it is, very, I don't know what he will think. So I said, I am from Rahimatpur. And he said, you are from Rahimatpur? That village where the great poet, the Girish Kavi, he is born there. I knew it, of course.
Uh-huh.
But when he say that, he started telling the story of Girish Kavi. His surname was Kanetkar, but because he got his noun to be Girish, as in his name is a Girish Kavi, and he wrote. He's the first poet to write what is called as a epic poetry. Is that correct word?
Yeah, epoch.
Epoch. It is called in Marathi. It is called Khanda Kavya.
Oh, interesting.
And he wrote it that on a mango trees and a family around the mango trees and their trials and tribulations throughout their life. And it became very famous. And those who are in Marathi, who studied in, let's say, Ferguson College or any other good college in Maharashtra, and he was studying in a Ferguson College, that teacher.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he remembered that, and he says that, I'm sure you are a great poet. I'm sure you must be writing great essays because somebody coming from that town. And that changed my whole, status, my mind, and my everything. And all those beautiful girls started looking at me with respect. And, I'm getting a praise from one important teacher. And then I don't know, I think he went to the teacher's room and told that, and every teacher then started, hey, who is this boy from Rahimatpur? And I used to stand up. That changed my life. So, I had a difficulty, but then again, I stood first in a class, and then in a whole of Maharashtra, there is called as a board list of merits. I came 24th in a whole list.
Wow.
They published list of 50, and out of that I was placed on 24th, which is coming from village. Many people thought that it is something different, and I achieved that.
Wow.
So you asked me what is it like coming from Mumbai, and that's how the transformation took place.
Wow. So you're a great student. I actually want to ask you, what was your method of studying, or was it just something that was innate to you and you were just really smart? Or did you have a process which kind of predisposed you to do really well?
Look, this is what my other students said to me, that I always had I used to study the textbooks. There's no doubt. I used to solve a lot of problems, mathematics problems, physics problems, chemistry problems. Sometimes I used to recite also, because I know that some of the questions are objective. Then you must know how to fill that and what exactly is the correct answer. But one trait that others told me was that while solving the problem, I always think different than others. One of the examples I will give you, while solving some of the geometry problems, I used to look at certain angles which are in a trigonometry. People have the what is called as a small angle, and I used to work outside that angle. So people will focus if you have a acute angle, okay, and you normally look at the space between the two lines,
right?
And I will look at the space around that.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what. And then it became a sort of a practice for Mumbai school people. It was in Khar. It was a very posh area.
Oh, no way. Yeah.
Yeah. You know Khar?
I lived in Khar briefly, yeah.
Oh, it's a
Before
nice
the
place.
pandemic, yeah. Yeah.
It's a nice place.
Mhm.
And there then it became a practice by all the students that who were not able to solve that problem in geometry or mathematics, they will come. And I used to solve it in 5 minutes. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't take a great pride in it. It just came to
uh-huh.
me. It
That's
just
very
came to me.
interesting. So you were inverting the problem. So where people were looking in the small angle, you were like looking at it from the inverse of that.
Yes, exactly. And I think that has been a tendency all over. And
Interesting.
you sent me that podcast
Yeah.
of Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can link
What
that
I
in our
liked
show
is the
notes. Yeah.
title of
Mhm.
yeah. What I liked is the title of it. He was telling what is the progress of progress. I
Yeah.
loved it. He says how you define the progress. You start
Yeah.
from basic. And whether it is a GDP, whether it is a revenue for the industry,
Mhm.
whether your marks in a mark sheet, which they are
Mhm.
growing, is this the progress? What is the
Yeah.
progress of definition and how it is progressing? So I used to love those kind of things. So even my essays in Marathi
Mhm.
and later on my essays in English, when I went to the college area, uh, I used to write in a different, and somehow the, the teachers or the professors used to like that I'm thinking in a different way, out of box.
That's interesting. That's so
Yes.
you had these tools, right? Like you were inverting problems, you were looking at it from the outside in. And I
Right.
think that's very similar to how you came to Bombay, right? You were an outsider looking inside into that
Right.
city. And
Right.
that seems to
Right.
have translated. I wanted to
Yeah.
segue into colleges. So you went to IIT Bombay. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. First, I went to Ruia College in Mumbai.
Oh, really? Okay.
And
How?
yeah, because after 1 or 2 years in college, you go to IIT.
Oh, wow. So back then it was like that. So you had to go
Yeah,
to
it is
college to go. Okay, wow.
right, exactly. And
But
I was in Ruia College for some time, and for a year, and then I appeared for the entrance examination.
Mhm.
And that I told you that the idea in my mind was introduced by my friend in Rahmatpur,
Right.
and also one of my cousins who were
Mhm.
staying in the same building, and he was a
Oh, okay.
brilliant guy. He was absolutely brilliant guy, and I used to learn from him a lot of things. And then
Mhm.
I appeared for the entrance examination, and normally those who this JEE
Yeah.
which you appear
At, yeah.
for, yeah, I was all India about 136th rank,
Holy
and
moly.
in Western India, that time they used to do the region wise. I was I think 26th or 27th.
Wow. You know, we were talking about this on the day that the JEE main starts.
Yes.
Um, and I think there are about 8,800,000 or like about 9 lakh people who are taking it this year.
Right.
And
Right.
you're somebody who's crushed that exam. Pardon my French.
Yes. Right.
What?
Remember one thing.
Yeah.
That time there were not 9 lakhs. I remember that time it was about 1 lakh people used to appear.
Wow.
And I think that must be because many people didn't know that IITs exist. Very few
Interesting.
people knew, because I did some kind of quick survey of my hostel and
Uh-huh.
also my class to see how many of them have come from rural area. And apart from me, there was only one guy came from village area. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
And
Wow.
others, they came from one of the best schools in Mumbai or in
Mhm.
Delhi. And they were speaking such a great English. And my English was like, even today my English is not all that great. No accent and all those things. But they were like that. So and today I think probably the IIT examinations format has also changed, and that is a one examination, and I know who sets those papers. I met them in Delhi IIT.
Interesting.
Is very unique way. It is a unique way. Nobody can what do you call it? Steal it or mm, corrupt the whole process.
Interesting. Can you walk me through that?
Interesting. At that time, I think about when I passed out from IIT and took up my first job. I happened to come to IIT Delhi, and they told me how it is done, and I was because I did ask him, if it is so tough and it's so competitive, there are many rich boys whose parents would be tempted to give some money to get the paper.
Right.
And he
Right.
said, that professor said, impossible. It is like this. I think there are about 50 professors asked to set up the paper. Suppose, take an example of physics. Okay. So
Okay.
50 asked to set up the papers.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay.
Then those papers are scrutinized by committee of 10. You know, understand?
Is there an overlap of people who are they the same people who set the paper, or a different group of 10
No,
people?
different, high
Okay.
level, high level,
Okay.
people, high level.
Okay.
people.
Interesting.
Some
Okay.
of them are working in Indian Institute of Science. Some of
Okay.
them are
Wow.
working in CSIR and those kind of people.
Oh wow. Okay.
And then out of those 50 setup papers of physics,
Mhm.
they select 10. Okay.
Oh wow. Okay. Okay.
And they then put those papers in a machine which is rotated. And one was asked to take out only one paper.
Oh wow.
And that becomes a paper with a blind. And it is, all things are folded.
Ah, interesting.
I'm
Interesting.
sure with machines and computers, today it must have been changed, because the same thing can be done with the
Yeah.
machines.
Yeah.
Some blind pickup and all those things. So it must have got more probably more difficult to crack, to corrupt the process.
That's very interesting. But what makes an IIT Bombay so unique? So especially IIT Bombay, because it's a college which fascinates me. I think out of all the IITs, at least now, it's become very unique in the kind of people it has churned out. From people who have run the United Nations Environment Program to people who have basically come up and started, an Infosys and everything in between. What makes IIT Bombay so unique that it kind of creates these group of leaders every year after year?
Yeah. I would give you an out-of-box answer for that. See, number one is the setup, where it is located. It is located near the Powai Lake.
Mm-hmm.
And it is located and surrounded by the hills.
True.
And that particular setup is quite inspiring. That's number one. Yeah. The second thing is, most of the professors, like other IITs, used to stay in the campus. So you meet them regularly. In the evenings, if you have difficulties, you can meet them, solve it, and all those things. And the professors there probably have understood the importance of living with the students. It is like our ashram. Instead of you go to ashram, there is a guru, and you live with him.
Right.
It's the same setup that is there.
Interesting.
The third thing is, I think IIT Bombay was preferred place for most of the top ranking guys in a JEE. See, at that time I'm talking about. I think today I feel IIT Kharagpur, IIT Madras have probably equal or even better status, but still IIT Bombay is sought after by the people. But it's because, the cream of the cream comes to IIT Bombay, so you live with them.
Right.
So you share the vision that they have while you're talking to them. You know,
Interesting.
the weekends, the library is open for you up to
That's
late
nice.
in the night.
That's
Somebody
nice.
told me that you can, and then the people used to take walks and talk to each other. And then you learn a lot, you know,
Mhm.
growing by sharing is what
Right.
happens there.
Interesting.
You share your, probably when each one of us go to the industry,
Mhm.
probably you won't share because then you enter into the area where it is a confidential thing.
Right.
But sharing happens in IIT Bombay campus to the great extent.
Mhm.
And some of the professors were just, you know, unimaginable. The kind of sympathy, kind of knowledge they had. I will give you an example. I was in a chemical engineering and head of the department was Professor N.R. Kamath. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And he, of course, wrote a lot of books in chemical engineering and all those things.
Mhm.
And he used to be asked, he was asked by the industry people as a consultant.
Uh-huh.
And that's why he used to bring that knowledge back to us,
Mhm.
saying that how he is working as a consultant.
Wow.
And he said, somebody is fabricating the equipment in Mumbai is to be
Mhm.
transferred to Kolkata. Okay.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And depending on the size of that equipment,
Mhm.
he used to tell those people that you cannot take that big one. You have to fabricate it in Calcutta, even if it is cheaper or even if by adding the transport cost. Because
Interesting.
the bridges on the
Uh-huh.
way, you will take it by railway, they are so weak in some places, and he will point out which bridges.
Wow. Okay. Oh, that
And,
that's
and he had
crazy.
another example saying that somebody wanted to manufacture a big reactor
Mhm.
of mild steel in Pune and bring it to Bombay. And
Interesting.
he said, you cannot. Because the
Wow.
height of the tunnel,
Uh-huh.
even if you go by the road or railway,
Uh-huh.
is smaller than your diameter of that reactor. Now,
Wow.
that is the chemical engineering. You know, chemical engineering is not about producing a chemical. Chemical engineering is about looking beyond the boundaries. And
That's very
that
interesting.
kind of professors you have, and they're sharing such knowledge, is just a wonderful thing.
That's amazing. So I want to kind of okay. So we spoke about a few things now, right? So just to kind of move out of this chapter, I wanted to ask one final question, right?
Mhm.
So we're talking about development. We're talking about universities, and there is this clear trend, right? You bring a lot of smart people under a small geographic location. That can be IIT Bombay, that can be Boston, that can be San Francisco, and magic tends to happen, right? Um,
Mhm.
is there a chance that this is self-selecting, right? The smartest people go to IIT Bombay. Therefore, IIT Bombay becomes predisposed to having a lot of innovation and having people who are going out and doing things. Is that
Mhm.
transferable to other colleges across India? Is that a solution that can scale, or is it better off for a country to have like small pockets where we invest in the smartest people and there is a trickle down to the rest of the country, so to speak? And I think there's a case that can be made, right? A lot of really smart people have come, they've built industry, they've built the country, right? That's what engineers do, they build things. And that's good enough. That's a net positive that can't be replicated from a bottom up approach. Would you agree with that? Do you think that that
Yeah,
assessment would hold true?
I, I sort of agree on that. Let's take a step back, you know.
Mhm.
I told all good things, and you asked me the questions which are good enough about IIT Bombay and in general about IITs, which you talked about
Mhm.
just now. Okay.
Mhm.
But, you know, Dr. Abdul Kalam, our
Mhm.
former president, no more now, he used to, I feel that he used to get obsessed by addressing the IIT students. And
Mhm.
if you look at his speeches, many of them in IITs,
Yeah.
and each one was inspiring because he used to put the finger at the right place. He used to say that there is a rule in IIT
Mhm.
best in
Mhm.
and best out.
Out. Mhm.
So the best people go out of India, and the best
Yeah.
people are selected in for IIT, and the IIT send it to outside India.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
many of them settle.
Mhm.
Of course, people say that look, Sundar Pichai
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
indirectly helps India, but etc. But basically, if they would have remained in India,
Mhm.
they would have, and if at all the ecosystem in Indian industry is good enough to make him flourish with his
Mhm.
ideas,
Yeah.
probably what you say is correct, that we can trickle it down and get the people, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But let me tell you, the experiments that happened in IITs,
Mhm.
they happened within the campus, and outside the campus, the ecosystem for them to flourish
Mhm.
was non-existent. I was the
Interesting.
exception.
Yeah.
I was the exception because of my uncle. And I said that I'm not going to take, I mean, I could have easily got the admissions and the scholarships and in abroad,
Yeah.
but I said I'm going to stay back.
That was a conscious
And
decision you made.
a very conscious decision.
Interesting.
And when I went to this same professor, N.R. Kamath, he just appreciated. He says, if you don't want to go, don't go. There are a lot of chances here. You have to struggle hard, but you
Mhm.
would succeed.
Yeah.
And my
Wow.
first job was with Tata's.
Yeah. Tata Chemical, if I'm
Uh,
not wrong, right?
right, Tata Chemicals. Tata Chemicals. And it was in Mithapur, which is on a tip of Saurashtra,
Gujarat, right?
Gujarat. Yes.
Mhm.
Very near to Okha, which has a naval base of India, and the
Oh.
nearest place to Pakistan.
Ah, okay.
So whenever there used to be some kind of a war signals and all that, all our factories in Tata Chemicals and our houses used to get dark. Because if at all Pakistan wants to bomb, that is the first place they will bomb.
Wow.
Because it's so
Okay.
near, 20
Yeah.
minutes by flight.
Wow.
So, that Tata Chemical story, how I got into it is also amazing. I don't know whether you have time for that.
I do have all the time. We don't have a time limit on this podcast, so we can make it
Okay,
as long or as short as we wanted to.
right. So when I decided to stay back, in fact, I wanted to set up a unit to dry the onions
Wow.
and sell it in the Middle East. That was my idea.
Why? Why onions?
Uh, there are a lot of production of onions, and Middle East, I heard from some of my friends that if you dry them, they can be again put it in the water, and then they can use it as a fresh things, or you can use it as it is, dry one, in many of the recipes in the Middle East. And that
So basically, you
time,
dehydrate it and then you rehydrate it. That's
right,
the basic
either you
structure.
rehydrate or you keep it dehydrated and
Uh-huh.
still put it in your recipes while making your food. And that time Middle East was growing fast because of their oil and all those things.
This was in the 70s, I would ballpark, right?
Exactly. And I was obsessed with this idea. I said, I will go back to Rehmatpur, get all these farmers together, ask them to sell all their onions to me. I will dry them. Drying in chemical engineering is one of the easiest things to do. You only need a heat. So I had a
Right.
number of ideas on heating, how to heat it and how to dry it. And
So
then
it's
I
not like
also
you put it out in the sun and it dries itself. It's not that, right?
also.
Oh,
But you
interesting.
want to do it quick, because if you want to increase the production,
Right.
either you spread it in 1 acre to dry it.
Right.
But solar drying is one of the ways. You are perfectly right. There are some solar dryers, but not just spreading and get it dried, but getting the solar energy in a concentrated way and then drying it.
Wow.
But
Okay.
there is another
So,
process of using thermal energy as well.
okay.
So I had that idea, and then I decided, I made a project report. Okay.
Wow.
I shown it
Okay.
to one of the professors, not Professor N.R. Kamath, but somebody else, and he said it looks to be a good idea. So the next was to go to the bank to get some finances. And
this is in the
I
70s. How
went to
old
some
were
of the
you at this
banks.
point? How old were you at this point?
See, it is like 16, 17, and 4, 21. I may be around 22.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay. I went to the
Okay.
banks and started my rounds of discussion with them.
Mhm.
And they liked the idea because it is to help the farmers and then export
Mhm.
and etc. etc. Okay.
Yeah.
And they asked me, okay, we are ready to give you loan, but what is the mortgage you will keep with us? And my parents didn't have anything. Neither I had anything. You know, I used to get a merit scholarship in IIT also.
Wow.
Of course, my parents used to say, send me some additional money in case I require it.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't have the money. So I told them, no money. I don't have any money. So he said, why don't you put your ancestral home as a mortgage in Rehmatpur? Now that home didn't belong only to me. It belonged
Right.
to my uncles, and uncles' sons, daughters, everybody.
Wow.
I felt that, you know, I was a bit shy to go to my family members, all of them, 10 of them, and say that, okay, can we keep this as a mortgage for the bank? Sometimes I feel that probably I should have gone. But,
Really?
you know, I
Wow.
felt,
That's
you know what, that's where IIT became a sort of a negative point. You understand?
why so? Why so?
Because I thought, and it was happening around me, that you go to them and they say, why you want to do such things? Just take a flight and go to USA.
Wow.
And, you know, I going from door to door asking for mortgage from these 10 people.
Mhm.
I really felt, you know, it was sort of a shame. And, you know, I spent 7 months after the results of IIT BTech. In 7 months, each and every of my colleague either got a job or they were out in USA.
Wow.
Just like what Dr. Kalam used to say, best in and best out.
Out.
And I was a rare thing. And then I was torn, you know, I was feeling, you know, many times I used to feel it's a crying situation. So I went back to N.R. Kamath, my professor, and told him my dilemma. Because I could not have said that to anybody else, not to my parents, because they don't understand. They were just, my mother was a primary teacher and my father was a music teacher. They would not have understood this.
Right.
And then Professor Kamath, he literally put hand on my shoulder. And he says, don't worry. If you want to do that, you can do it even after 2-3 years. First, take a job.
Yeah.
And I said, look, after 7 months now, because I had about 3 campus interviews, okay?
Right.
One of them was Tata Chemicals. So he asked me how many campus interviews. I said I had 3. And Tata Chemicals has informed me that you come and do that. And I did went to Mithapur for the final interview and came back for a very funny reason that my weight, they found it was below their norm. So I told that to Professor N.R. Kamath. That only on a ground in final interview, I was rejected because my weight was below normal. Okay, and I could have told this only to professor. I could not have told this to my relatives. I could not have told this to my parents. But yes, that was true. My weight was below norm. And when I told this to Professor Kamath, you know what he did?
What?
He phoned the chairman of Tata Chemicals in front of me.
That's a power move. That's a power move right there.
Yeah, and that is the advantage of IIT Bombay professors. And he said that Mr. Rajendra Shende, he is selected for the final interview. He appeared for the final interview. He went to Mithapur for physical checkup, and only his weight is down. He said, send him to me tomorrow. So I went to Bombay House. That's where Tata Chemical headquarters are. Okay.
Yeah.
And when I went to Bombay House, you can imagine my weight. I was a very thin guy, skinny guy. And I asked the receptionist that I want to meet this chairman. He said, do you have an appointment? I said, he told me to come and meet. So she calls the private secretary of that, and he tells chairman, it was Darbari Seth at that time, you know. I don't know whether you know him. He's
Nope.
no more. Yeah. So finally I went to his room. He said, sit down. He said, what is your story? Why you are still unemployed?
Oh, wow.
So
Okay,
I
that's
told
hard.
him my plan for the onion and everything
Uh-huh.
in about 2 to 3 minutes. And from there, he called on a hotline, Mithapur,
Uh-huh.
and he said, okay, I've talked to the people. Tomorrow morning, you will catch a train and go to Mithapur and start your work. And I told him, but tomorrow morning, you know, I'm coming from Rehmatpur, and I don't have a place to stay in Mumbai.
Uh-huh.
He said, that's not a problem. There is a Tata guest house. You go there and see, and then you say that Darbari Seth has said, and then stay there. I was so delighted. I went there like a king, saying that I'm Darbari Seth's man. And I started working there in a Tata Chemicals. And the sad part of the story is, I gave up the idea of drying the onions.
Would you do it now? These many years later, would you consider drying onions and exporting them to other countries?
Look, when I started working in UNEP,
Mhm.
you know, I don't know how many countries I visited. Must be 80, 90. So
Wow,
number of
that's-
Middle East countries like Qatar, Dubai, UAE, and your Oman and Saudi Arabia. I went all over the place. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And I wanted to see how the dried onions getting sold.
Hello? Hello? So we were at, you went to so many countries and you wanted to, I think you were curious about finding out.
I just wanted to imagine how rich I would have been, whether I can reach Ambani level, you know. And I tell you,
Mhm.
each of those supermarkets and malls, whenever you go to that grocery part of that mall,
Mhm.
they were all displaying dry onions.
Was there a lot of dry onions there?
Yeah. And, you know, that is the point, but that was too late, you know. It was a big, I mean, your question has put me in a wrong, I'm a retired United Nations guy. And I would promote the person like you to go into the dry onion business now, but I won't do it myself.
Let me ask you a consulting question then, right?
Yeah.
So you go to all these countries, you visited them, the shelves are stocked with dry onions,
Yes.
right? So, and it's a commodity, right? Anybody can tomorrow go get dry onions, dry it up and export it.
Yes.
So what's the moat, right? Either if it's such a saturated market and there are a lot of players in it, how does one differentiate other than having like an economies of scale? But if there are already established players, how do you kind of build a moat around a business of dry onions? I'm sorry, we are pivoting this conversation to talking
Doesn't
about
matter.
onions.
No,
Yeah.
I think see, as I told you, I like out of box situations, you know. So
Love it.
let's discuss about onions. By
I
the way,
love it.
I stay in a farm
Mhm.
where I grow onions.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but
Oh,
you ask me now, because that time, of course, I would have become a good industrialist,
yeah,
and
for sure.
because that time there may not be competition, but now there is a competition because entry level
Mhm.
doesn't have such a great expertise. Anybody can dry
Right.
onion.
Right.
So,
True.
but that time I would have made it. Now, coming back to your question, you have to have your some unique selling points,
Mhm.
USP or dry onion.
Mhm.
One of the things you can do is there are white onions and there are red onions,
Yeah.
right? And so you can have chips or dried white onions because they have a different value. Okay.
Interesting.
Then you can have dried onions from organic farming.
Interesting.
Then you can have a dry onion from natural farming. There is
Mhm.
a difference between organic farming and natural farming.
I wouldn't know the difference. What would the difference be between those two?
Yeah. Okay. And remember that in this budget,
Mhm.
Nirmala Seturaman,
Mhm.
sorry, Nirmala Sitaram,
Mhm.
she has promoted natural farming and she has put a separate budget for that, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So coming back to your question,
Mhm.
natural farming is you don't till it, okay?
Okay.
Keep as it is, don't
Okay.
remove the shrubs, but just sow your seeds and let it grow. You understand?
Yeah, but wouldn't that be inefficient? Like, wouldn't the yield or the efficiency of
Yeah,
growing it?
that's the problem with the way we are thinking. Okay.
Okay.
There are now farmers which say that
Mhm.
doing a natural farming
Mhm.
or nature farming, you
Mhm.
can get yield as much as with all the chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Many contest it, saying that that may not be true,
Mhm.
but it exists. There are some examples where some of the farmers have passionately gone into it and made good money out of it. Okay.
Interesting. Mhm.
So you don't give any fertilizer either. Okay.
Interesting.
And organic is where you use the nature's chemicals, like you use the cow dung, you
Right.
use the cow's urine, and
Mhm.
then there are natural biopesticides.
Mhm.
Uh, I have an organic farm here, so
Nice.
I utilize all that.
Mhm.
There are no books on it, but the only way to learn it is through the informal network of farmers.
Oh
And
wow. Okay.
yeah. So if you have any problem, you can talk to them, and then they'll say that, because
Mhm.
and it cannot be having a books, because organic farming depends on place to place. Just like
Interesting.
language changes
Right.
in India every
Uh-huh.
100 kilometer or something.
Mhm.
Uh, I believe that organic farming techniques also
Mhm.
change every 100 kilometer, because it depends on the
Interesting.
weather, soil condition of there. So there is no
Mhm.
spatial. Only thing, you can have a definition of organic farming, but you
Mhm.
cannot have a fixed process of organic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're making onions right now, right? And let's say
Yes.
we're going down this organic farming route. We're making organic onion chips, right?
Yes.
Where would you set up this plant? It doesn't.
No,
It so if I had. Mhm.
no, even if you give me the money to set it up, I will not set it up now. But I can
Mhm.
encourage you to set up.
Okay, so let's say I'm setting up an organic onion farm.
Yes.
Um, Question to you, right? So there are two things I actually want to ask. So one is where you set up an onion farm is kind of important, right? I'm guessing there are some strategic resources which
Agreed.
would predispose some places over others.
Right.
What would be the thought process of looking at that? Two is that if it doesn't scale, right? So if I can't make a plant in Kolkata and then go to Ranchi and replicate that plant, and then go to Kashmir and replicate that plant,
Mm.
there is kind of a huge operational cost of figuring out the same thing over and over again.
Right.
How do we circumvent that?
Yeah. Look, the scenario for onions is the best places to grow it is Karnataka, Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and maybe Bihar and Odisha. Okay.
Mhm.
Uttar Pradesh and all that they consider onion growing is a lower level task. They go
Interesting.
for cane sugars and rice and all those things. Okay. But if you want to say in Maharashtra, between
Mhm.
Pune and Nasik,
Mhm.
I think is the best place to set up that plant. Okay.
Okay.
And you either go for organic or
Mhm.
even natural farming and the white onions and dry them. And you use the solar drying process. So I think you can make enough of solar drying, stock it, and during the rainy season, you stop the solar drying, and you only start releasing your
We-
stocks.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that
Interesting.
can be done. Now, apart from that, you would need many of the marketing techniques, and you probably can engage one advertising agency
Mhm.
where the Middle East, one nice actress or something
Uh-huh.
comes on board and says that I always use this kind of onions. They are much better than this, something like that, you know.
Yeah.
Or you go to FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization.
Mhm.
They, as a good story of organic farming, they can publish it.
Oh, okay.
And
Wow.
so that's it.
Interesting. So one last question about farming, and then we can move on to other things. I would
Right.
not imagine myself having this.
Right.
A type of farming which has come up over the last couple of years is hydroponically growing things, right? Vertical farming, if you will. Now, the limiting agent, if I'm to start a onion farm, is I'll
Mm.
need a lot of space, right? I'll
Mm.
need acres and acres if I have to do it at scale.
Mm.
And as you said earlier, we are moving into urban spaces. So
Mm.
there seems to be a solution at the fringe, which is, hey, instead of going out and looking for agricultural land, and I think this is what makes India's produce very unique. Like our vegetables are the freshest in the world, right? Because our supply chains are a lot shorter.
Mm.
Going by that same principle, hydroponic farming basically says, hey, we're going to build up and do these in a more scientific experimental way, where maybe not even scientific experiment, like that's the wrong way to taxonomize it. But the
Mm.
idea that, hey, we can build up without a lot of soil, without any soil at all.
Yes.
Where do you see that going?
I think that can be definitely used, and it's a good way that we are thinking about it. Okay,
Mhm.
because by 2050 we will be 9 billion.
Yeah.
Okay, and feeding those 9 billion,
Mhm.
and I'm not just talking about feeding means filling the stomach. I'm talking about
Mhm.
feeding them with the appropriate nutrients
Mhm.
is the challenge. And
Right.
hydroponic provides the opportunity to meet that gap. See,
Interesting.
in controlled atmosphere,
Mhm.
hydroponic, you can grow some of the costly vegetables which will be acting as a nutrients.
Mhm.
You understand?
Yeah.
So instead of, let's say, you have salads,
Mhm.
and that salads have some nutrient values.
Right.
Maybe vitamin B, it has a vitamin C, etc.,
Mhm.
etc. Then you have mushrooms, which provides the
Right.
protein. Okay.
Right.
As the climate change goes on, it will be difficult to get adequate fish
Right.
because the oceans are getting acidic
Right.
and temperature is going high, so the fish cannot survive there.
Right.
Plus, we are surrounded by the countries like China who are
Mhm.
just fishing in a
Yeah.
troubled water.
Yeah.
So there is a huge lot of competition in getting fish from the ocean.
Mhm.
So the nutrients that Indians should get it will
Mhm.
probably come from the mushroom-like things or another exotic vegetation which can be
Mhm.
grown in a hydroponic.
Mhm.
So they can act as a what is called as a nutrient agent And I won't be surprised, thinking out of box. I won't be surprised that instead of selling these vitamins in a medical shops,
Mhm.
we will have in about 10 to 15 years time, the supermarkets selling the vitamins through vegetables.
That's interesting.
Yeah, people will buy mushrooms because they want proteins. Okay, people will
Interesting.
buy some salad, maybe iceberg
Yeah.
or various kind of salads. They will buy from there to get this because they will get vitamin rich, or the deficiency will disappear. They will be more worried about their children. And for children, they will start feeding not all those exotic bone vita and all that, but probably salads.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
uh,
Okay.
so hydroponic is the possibility, and as the land is going to get difficult because it will be beyond the reach of some of the middle class who want to become entrepreneur. I think the hydroponic is a good solution.
Interesting. By that same logic, I think aquaculture would also come up, right? And
Yes,
take the
yes,
place and
very true.
there
Very
might
true.
be an argument here also, right? Like if you can do it at scale, produce might become cheaper, right? Technology tends to do that. Like computers were really expensive, now they're not so expensive.
Very
Same
true.
with cars.
Yes.
And maybe this would be the way to make like healthy proteins available to most people.
Right.
So this brings me to the next section, which I think would be the real brass tacks, right?
Yeah.
You're at UNAP now. You've left the corporate sector. How did that transition happen? And after that, I'm going to ask you a very first principles question about climate change. So I just want to set the tone for the next half of this.
Okay, good. See, many things in my life have happened because I was there at the right time with the right people and with the right kind of an opportunity coming up. Okay. So I left the corporate sector, but before that, I had a job with SRF Limited, Shriram Fibers in Delhi, and I was a general manager as a there. Okay.
Oh wow! How old were you then?
Okay, I was 40.
Wow! So you spent a lot of time in the corporate sector. So you spent like, yeah.
Wow. I spent 20 years in corporate sector and 20 years in United Nations.
Wow.
And I was a very unique person to have spent. Normally in United Nations, the people are what do you call it, nominated or given a representation in United Nations by the government.
Right.
So most of the people are government people there. For example, just to give you our former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. He went to UNCTAD. Now it has become WTO. The name has changed, the mandate has changed. But he went there as a government representative.
Right.
Many people go on assignment for 2 years, 3 years. Some of them get confirmed longer term because they do a good job. Right. But coming from the private sector, I'm talking about 1992. Coming from the private sector, I was sort of an unique guy. And whenever people used to say, "Oh, you are from India, so you must have been nominated by the government," I said, "No." So how the opportunity came? The opportunity came, I was in Shriram Fibers, and his chairman, Arun Bharatram, I think he's still there. He he one day told me that he used to call me Rajinder. You probably couldn't pronounce Rajendra very well. So he said, "Rajinder, why don't you go to the Ministry of Environment? The secretary there wants to talk to you." I mean, I guess the secretary must have talked to Arun Bharatram, and Arun Bharatram, not being very conversant with the environmental issues, he must have asked me to take it because he was busy with many other things. So I went to his secretary, the Environment Ministry secretary. And Environment Ministry secretary said, "Oh, you are from IIT, right?" I said, "Yes, I am from IIT. And you worked in a number of chemical industries. Because probably Arun Bharatram had already given my biodata to him. And he said, "Look, we have one international document on which we would like to negotiate." Okay. And and see how India can then become a party to this particular agreement.
Uh-huh.
Now, those words were difficult for me to understand because I never dealt with this, but I slowly started understanding it. And he gave me that document, put it in front, and he says, come after 2 days and give me your strategy, what India should do.
Wow.
That changed my life. That changed my life. I went, took that document, and I was telling you that I used to read all those things, and then my eyes started aching and head started aching. I read that document and my head didn't start aching. I enjoyed reading it.
Wow.
It was a document called as a draft of Montreal Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And that protocol was asking all the countries to join it to protect the ozone layer so that life on Earth can be saved.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
This stratospheric ozone layer, which is about 30 to 40 kilometers above the Earth,
mm-hmm.
it filters the UV rays.
Right.
You require some part of the UV rays, but some part of the UV rays, which is high energy rays, you don't need it, because if they come to the surface of Earth, it is a high energy, will destroy the whole life.
Right.
So it acts like that, but the scientists were saying that some of the chemicals we produce, they go up in ozone layer and destroy the ozone layer.
Right.
Now imagine that if ozone layer continues to get destroyed, you and me will not exist.
Of course.
Neither any flora and fauna.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, the first thing is that we cannot even say that we don't want to join. That's number one.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you want to join, I started making a survey of what kind of chemicals they were. And I saw that I had worked in some of those chemicals when I was in a public sector unit.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I don't know whether that was the reason that secretary asked me to come and look at it. But even SRF wanted to go in those chemicals. And that may also be reason why I should be joining.
Interesting.
So in 2 days' time, I made a strategy.
So in 2 days, you did your survey, you did all your research, and you came up with a strategy?
Wow. I came up with a strategy for India, how to negotiate the protocol. Okay?
Wow. Okay.
And after 2 days, I went there.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that I want to give a presentation. That time you didn't have these projectors and laptops.
Mm-hmm.
There you had it transparencies, we used to keep it on top and then it gets flashed on a screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I have a transparency. He said, we in fact want from you a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I gave him a presentation. It was pretty simple. I said, this much we produce. They are used for these kind of things. It's unfortunate that they escape to the atmosphere and damage the ozone layer. So we have to stop those chemicals. But then you cannot stop it unless we have alternatives.
Right.
Because those are the chemicals which were used in there. For example, a refrigerator.
Right.
Okay? Now you cannot say that these chemicals will no longer be used in a refrigerator. Then what do you do with the refrigerator? And how you preserve food?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to find the alternative technology. So I said, most of this ozone layer has been damaged by the developed countries because they produce a lot. India produces probably 8% of the total chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they should give us all money for setting up a new plants to manufacture new chemicals which do not damage the ozone layer, and they should also give us a technology.
Wow. Okay. That seems straightforward. I'm guessing it's not that easy.
Yeah. And then secretary said that this is the way we are also thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So after 2 days, why don't you give this same presentation? You and me will give a joint presentation to minister. And you know who was a minister at that time?
No.
Maneka Gandhi.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow. So after 2 days, along with Arun Bharatram, because then I could not go to and meet minister alone. So Arun Bharatram also accompanied me. And then secretary came and we gave a joint presentation. So first part, how much production is there, that's what we informed by secretary. Then I said that this is what the strategic elements are for negotiations. And Maneka Gandhi was like, heel over it. She said, I like this way. We must negotiate like this. They damaged the ozone layer, so we should get a compensation. And then we said that we will join your movement.
Interesting. So,
and because, to cut the story short, because there are a lot of technicalities involved in it, you know. It is used in a refrigerator.
right.
So you know about how it exactly does in a, then it is used in aerosol, which is rather simple. But
Right.
then it was also used in a complicated things like cold storages, then
Right.
in air conditioning, etc., etc., etc.
Mhm.
So, you know, the negotiating meeting took place, I think the first one is, if I'm not mistaken, Geneva.
Mhm.
So that time, you know, secretary phoned Arun Bharatram and told him that Mr. Shende should be there with us.
Wow.
And then you can imagine a company chairman
Yeah.
who wants to be good with secretary, you know, involvement. He will not say no. He said, no problem. In fact, I send him with my money.
Wow.
And that changed the whole thing. Then I came in contact with a lot of United Nations people in negotiation, a lot of countries. And one day I got this opportunity. They said that, okay, there is one now negotiation took place. The developed countries are ready to give money, technology. You handle the program
Mhm.
at
So, I have a question for you.
global level. Yeah, go ahead.
So, at Geneva, you're essentially, so I studied this when I was, I think, in class 4 or 5, right? That CFCs are bad. And hey, you guys need to like cut it out, or like, and that was a good way to also like bring that conversation home.
Yeah.
At Montreal, there were probably, I don't know, at least 100 or so countries. I mean, I wouldn't be able to put a number on it, each with its own set of, you know, interests.
Yeah.
What was your strategy genuinely in kind of going into that negotiation, and what can maybe, you know, somebody who's not even in, you know, this field of work learn about negotiations from, you know, that one particular event?
Very good question. Not many people have asked me this. A village
Thank
boy
you.
worked in private sector companies, a chemical engineer from IIT, how he can negotiate when there are 160 or 170 countries at that time, you know. Now there are 196 to be
Right.
precise, okay?
Uh-huh.
Frankly speaking, I had only strategy and negotiating points. The negotiations were done by either Maneka Gandhi or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or ambassadors in that particular country. Suppose the meeting is in Montreal. So the ambassador and Maneka Gandhi an ambassador from Canada, Indian ambassador in Canada, and Maneka Gandhi used to come. They used to read the paper, which is based on our strategy, commonly agreed strategy, and they used to make a presentation. They used to negotiate. So I learned very quickly what is a language. You know, it's not taking a sword in a hand and say that no, we are not going to do that unless you do that. You do it in a nice diplomatic way, you know. And that exactly is the environmental diplomacy. There are a lot of books are written after 1970 on environmental diplomacy. People only know the political diplomacy. Okay.
Right.
You negotiate with China on your border issue is a political one.
Right.
On a global issue like climate change, it's a different kind of game, you know. And I learned it very quickly because it was again a out of box strategy to present it. And I was surprised, you know. I remember in Nairobi, me, the environment secretary, ministry secretary, and the minister, we were staying all in a hotel. And we were negotiating that in a daytime. And the USA representative, the counterpart, she came and told Maneka Gandhi that we want to talk to you. And she said, no problem, we can talk. And she called me, she called secretary, and we were all talking. So, you know, funny thing, what happens? See how the negotiation take place. She said, we have heard you. You want money and technology. How much money you need?
And this was the Americans, right? This was the Americans.
Yeah, USA. She
Very
said,
direct culture, right? Very direct culture,
direct
straight
culture.
to the point. Yeah.
Cut it short.
Hmm.
Because you remember, if ozone layer gets depleted,
Hmm.
the UV rays affect them more because they are on the beaches. We don't have time to go to the beach except for some time. So they were more conscious to save the ozone layer. See, look, I think that is petty argument from me. So don't consider seriously.
Oh, but that's funny. Yeah.
Whole world would have got affected.
Yeah.
So let's say a major country gets affected, and the United States can't remain alone because there are so many interconnections between the countries. So it was a global issue, but that is a direct thing. And then I remember Maneka Gandhi looked at me, and she said, "Hey, do we have the figure?" And luckily I had thought of it. With the help of a number of Delhi economists. I won't go into details of that.
Mhm.
That if at all the developed countries have to give to developing countries money for this particular thing,
Mhm.
how much it would be. And I said, yes, we have done study and we have a range. We don't have exact figure.
Wow.
So we said that it is between $1 billion to $2 billion. I still remember that.
That's a big number.
She got up from her seat, the USA delegate, and she says, well, that is reasonable. Tomorrow we can make a deal.
Wow. Okay.
And the
Again,
deal
very
was
to the point.
all developed countries agreed to pay the money to the developing countries. And I was made in charge of that in United
Wow.
Nations. Of course, there were many other people who were looking after how the factories will change and how the technologies will be given. But I was a global head for Ozone Action Program
Mhm.
in United Nations Environment Program.
What was the first day like on the job?
Well, you should note it. In Paris, one after another for 20 years, I had 3 bosses whom I was reporting to. All of them were French and all of them were ladies.
What? Sorry, I missed that.
They were female.
Oh,
Ladies.
okay. Oh,
So
okay, nice.
all 3 ladies, French ladies, one after another, because they go to another job, one gets retired, another goes to another job. So I had 3 successive bosses,
Mhm.
which were French and they were ladies,
Mhm.
female.
Mhm.
And I don't know whether you have worked with the French female boss.
Not yet.
It's tough. It's nothing but tough.
Wow.
Okay. So the first day you asked me the question.
Mhm.
So she said, look, we have selected you from global interviews of number of people, and we have to go fast on this job because money is available.
Mhm.
So in the next 2 days, you will prepare a strategy because there was nobody. I was the first one on an ozone program.
Mhm.
And I developed it from scratch. It says 2 days, you will prepare a table which she wanted to give it to the United Nations office in Montreal and Nairobi.
Mhm.
How many people you require for a first year, second year, third year, fifth year, 10 year till the phase total chemicals get destroyed and new chemicals come in a picture which are ozone friendly.
Right.
And how much money you require, and don't write very detailed, but write bullet points. What will be the actions done by these people?
Mhm.
In my mind, I smiled because this is the kind of a job I wanted, and because I had worked that before for working out that figure of 1 billion to 2 billion. Making that particular table was so easy, and that made it in 2 days time, and she was very happy. That's how it started.
Wow. So a lot of modeling, essentially It seems like a lot of it is building models for.
building models. Yeah, I can tell you the name of the persons who worked with me at that time
Uh-huh.
from Delhi. You are located in Delhi or Mumbai?
I'm currently in Calcutta, but I'm located in Mumbai.
Okay. But there is a Delhi very powerful person, very knowledgeable, Ashok Khosla. And he runs the NGO which is called as a Development Alternatives.
Mhm.
And he was the one who came to me to say that, okay, let's calculate this, because he was asked that job to do it by somebody else. And
Wow.
we together developed that. So I know how to arrive at setting up such programs and helping the developing countries. So I would like to jump to the final one that as per the Montreal Protocol, all the 146 developing countries have to carry out total elimination of ozone depleting chemicals
Right.
1st January 2010. And we declared that on 1st January 2010, the world is free of ozone depleting chemicals.
Wow. That's
Job
a 20-year project. That's a 20-year project to say job done.
That's right. Job done. So,
Wow.
to put something, I don't want to pat the back, but, a lot of things were done by the countries also. It's not
Right.
we only guided them, mentored them, developed a number of networking. My program expanded with nil people to about 50 people working in various regions with
Wow.
35 nationalities. And, the job was to be done by the country. I mean, we wouldn't go to the country and ask them to close the plant. I mean,
Right.
in a country like China, it was very difficult to convince them. But I think in general, countries were happy because they were getting money as well as technology.
Right.
If you are staying in a very comfortable hotel in a house in Kolkata,
Mhm.
and, you are given the new house
Mhm.
with similar facilities,
Right.
better opportunity to grow, you will go.
Of course.
Same thing happened to them. And they realize that there is no point in continuing manufacturing CFC because there will not be a market for that. Everything will be closing down. So
Interesting. Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. Finish your thought, please.
No, I wanted to say that I don't want to pat on my back because there are other people's also, particularly the countries, the United Nations in New York and various secretariats, they continue to doing that. But, I consider it as a unique story which probably cannot be repeated.
Interesting. Why?
The answer is in my book, which is coming soon.
I
So,
love it.
but I have a distinction because I was doing very well in ozone action. I was also made head. I was also asked to head a climate change program in Paris office. Of course, the climate change program also exists in UNDP, World Bank, UNIDO. Number of United Nations agencies are involved in it. But in UNEP, I was heading it for at least a couple of years when I retired. Now it has grown up, that program has grown into separate division and all those things, right? But I have a distinction of dealing with most successful program in the world. That is a Montreal Protocol to phase out ozone depleting substances. And at the same time, I have a distinction of heading the total failure of climate change program of United Nations. I don't think anybody has that distinction. How do you like it?
That's very interesting. Why would you put it like that?
I would put it like that because the way the countries did not work together in climate change. The negotiations were exactly on a similar point as Montreal Protocol. There are not much difference. But climate change was much wider, and it went into the individual life not only through the refrigerator, but through their transport,
right,
through their lighting, electricity, and it touched all aspects of the life.
Right.
And
So would
because,
it? Yeah.
and because I believe that developed countries thought that if such thing continues, and there are more than 200 environmental agreements which were to be in negotiation, just
Right.
with biodiversity, chemical weapons. There are
Right.
so many of them, and if you give in to these things, what happened in the Montreal Protocol, that will be quite a burden on developed country
Right.
or developed countries.
That makes sense.
So
That
we,
makes sense. That was
are,
going to be my question. That was going to be my
are you
exact question.
migrating?
Why not breaking up?
Are you migrating to developed countries?
I've actually come back from developed countries, and I'm probably also going back. But for now, I'm in India.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I asked you that because you said it is reasonable on developed countries to think that.
Yeah, that was my question, right? Like it seemed like what made Montreal unique was it was very focused,
Yes,
right? And the other was very general.
I agree with you. I agree
So
with
do
you.
you think the step forward is to like there isn't a general solution? It has to be a piecemeal solution, right? You have to take it step by step. Is that a fair takeaway?
That's what we promoted. But, step by step. See, what happens is you have a global problem, okay?
Right.
And you are trying to solve it,
Mhm.
okay? By way of some kind of a negotiation to take all the countries. Normally, two countries don't agree with each other. Now you have 190 countries you have to make to agree to one particular point. So that was a very difficult thing to negotiate. And I was not negotiating from India's point of view. That if
Right.
had I done that, probably things would have been different. No, I think that is talking too much of ego. No,
Right.
it was difficult. I know it was difficult. It was not so easy. It is dealt with oil, gas, coal,
Right.
and no, it was not easy. And the negotiators of India have done a wonderful job. But some of these countries started thinking in this way that why give the technologies free and why give the money just like that as a grant? So,
Right.
by that time, see, after Montreal, people also learned what could be other mechanism. That lady, USA lady, who just got up and said that it is doable, I don't think that will happen now for climate change. The reason is, people started thinking whether there is another way to help the developing countries.
Mhm.
So there is a loan mechanism,
Right.
there is concessional loans.
Mhm.
Then there is something called as a market mechanisms.
Right.
There is a carbon trading. There is a clean development mechanism, CDM. So all, carbon sequestering. Then it also came about various other technologies to put all this carbon dioxide capture and put it in the earth.
Mhm.
That will solve the problem. Why we need developing countries to agree to that, etc., etc., etc.
Mhm.
And then people lost it. And then we have a President Trump who says climate change is really a false.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Mhm.
I mean, I won't blame only President Trump.
Yeah.
There were like Putin, who made a comment that climate change, in Russia, we require a global warming. Why stop it? He may be right. Then even in Japan, Japan said that we depend only on oil and all that import of that. So we will join the movement, but we cannot promise that we'll agree to it. Japan is pretty complicated, but in one of the things, Japan didn't agree to it. They just walked out.
Wow.
Same thing for Australia. So,
Really, but Australia has moved to renewable energy. I was living in Sydney, and I think Sydney now has a lot of its energy which is renewable, right? So I think they use wind power and solar power. Like in that sense, Australia seems to be. Would it be fair to say they're using market mechanisms to change that?
No, I agree with you that countries have taken initiatives to go to the solar energy because their solar energy cost has also come down, and they see
Right.
the advantage in it.
Right.
Climate change negotiations is related to getting all the countries to do it. Even if Trump says that there are about 11 states out of 50 in the USA
Mhm.
who have pledged that we will follow the Paris Climate Agreement.
Yeah.
So Australia may be doing it. Even Japan does a good solar energy things. But where we are failing is not getting developing countries and developed countries together to get the job done.
Yeah.
And your carbon dioxide emissions continue to grow. There
Yeah.
may be piecemeal successes,
Mhm.
but it is not helping us to do that.
So would you taxonomize the Montreal Protocol as a piecemeal solution, or would you think that that was something bigger than just one small step?
See, it was a global solution. It was not a piecemeal solution at all.
Mhm.
It was a global solution. People agreed to it, started giving the money for that. They continued to give the money till the end.
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
USA.
Yeah.
Even if the government changed from Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican, the money started coming from Montreal Protocol.
Mhm.
That
Interesting.
is- now it is even, the agreement which had when Democratic Party in the USA were there in the government,
Mhm.
it was agreed that starting from 2009, developing countries will be paid $10 billion every year and step it up every year so that by 2020 it reaches, or I think 2015, it reaches $100 billion per year.
Wow.
So
That's a
people
lot
have
of money.
calculated, even I did a calculation, that developed countries owe about $1 trillion today to the developing countries under the climate
Yeah.
change. What has really come is hardly $10 billion.
Wow.
And that
That's a
is
big discrepancy. Yeah.
yeah, and that is a bone of contention. Contention, is
Mhm.
that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that is one of the things from developing countries. Now, with all this COVID-19 and all that, this appears to be a very funny thing to discuss on climate change.
Yeah.
Though climate change, I believe, is the next pandemic, but
Interesting.
still, still this may or may not happen.
So somebody who's growing up right now, right? If you could address, every 17-year-old or 18-year-old who is probably heading to college now, what would be the three things that you would think would be essential for them to know in order to tackle the next, 40 to 100 years with respect to climate change? And why should they care? Like, other than the obvious, like how to put context to that, right? I understand where the problem with climate change is, but as an individual, it seems like my contribution is going to be make no difference. So why should I care, right? So with that in mind, what would be three things that you would tell people who are in their 20s, who are 21, 22, maybe getting into their first job at Tata Chemicals now, that you
Yeah,
think would be useful for them for the next 50 years?
good question. Very good question. Puts me on a, you are putting me on a very high platform to address
No,
that.
not at all.
Yeah. Three things. Okay. Number one, I think each of them should calculate their carbon footprint and make an attempt to reduce it. If as a community in the universities or colleges, you can come together and start reducing it with a targeted steps as indicated by IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's the first thing I will tell them. How to do that, I can come back to later if you ask me.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Number two, but let me say it, the whole thing. Number two, they should form, the 17 and 18 year students, they should form a network of like-minded universities or colleges
Mhm.
with the help of cloud networking,
Mhm.
a technology which is available to everyone,
Right.
and develop what is called as a peer level competition, that who does that in a better way.
So
And
like a hackathon.
right, like a hackathon,
Mhm.
and share your knowledge or compete with them, make it a business so that you can sell it to the another
Right.
17, 18-year institute to do that.
Mhm.
And so that you spread this as if you are spreading a vaccine. See, according to me, if I said climate change is a pandemic, reducing the carbon footprint is a vaccine for that.
Mhm.
So that is the
Interesting.
second thing I will do it. And the third thing I will do it is developing a pressure on developed. I'm talking about a 17, 18 years old in India. Okay,
Mhm. Yeah.
that's the presumption. We will see. India has already been considered as a country with a progressive minds and emerging technologies. Okay,
Right.
so create a situation in such a way that you are ahead of the developed countries in tackling the climate change. And there are elements and packets in the developed countries who really want to get on the job and try to give that example and demonstrate to them. See, I'm
Mhm.
telling all those three things related to climate change. I can tell that in motivation factor that you should be
Mhm.
hard work, think out of box, and
Mhm.
what Steve Jobs said, remain hungry and foolish, and that
Foolish.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm telling climate change because in their career, in next 10 to 15 years, they will be facing this pandemic. And they shouldn't be get caught the way they got caught in COVID-19.
Interesting.
Yes. And if you don't take that measure, you will have to deal with it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll kind of move towards wrapping this up because I've taken up about 2 hours of your time already.
Yes.
Last
I,
two questions,
I
and then
enjoyed
I
it.
will.
I enjoyed
Me
it.
too. Me too. I think we'll probably do this again for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
We
so my
can
next
we can do
Mhm.
it on some focus issue. You know, you
Yeah.
probably you are smart. I think you would be able to get some key things there, which don't appear to be making my
Mhm.
personality a grand one, or even something which is not suitable for telling others.
Mhm.
And then we can pick up on that in a focus way. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really like that idea. So my next question would be, right, if you could meet, Rajendra Shende at 21 today, what would be one piece of advice you would give him?
One piece of advice:
One piece of advice only.
remain, keep on thinking out of box and act in a strategic way based on your out of box thinking.
A little more specific?
I would say try to remain different than others.
Interesting.
You
That
must
brings me to
have,
mm,
or I put it in another way. Uh, Imagine that the market
mm,
around you is is greedy about getting something which will help them,
mm.
and then advice is have a unique selling point
Interesting.
which others have not thought of.
That's interesting. So that brings me to my last question, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
I'm borrowing this question from Tim Ferriss. So if I give you a billboard in every major city in India,
Uh-huh.
what would you put on that billboard?
Oh la la, this is difficult. I would
Take your
say,
time.
I would say, get prepared for the next pandemic, climate change.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
I had a pleasure talking to you, and I'm very sure we'll be doing this again very soon.
Yeah. Tell me, how will you proceed?